I think we're there. Sorry for a little late start, but here we go. I'm Vinny, your host for this month's webinar, and I'm thrilled to have our guest, Troy Love, LCSW, which basically means he's a therapist and he helps people. We're happy to have you, Troy. Troy, you're in Yuma, Arizona.
That's right. 65 degrees here today.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll find a way to get back at you. We're about 20 degrees and still have snow on the ground and more on the way. But thank you for joining us in our webinar. And I just have to tell you, I've had an amazing experience, Troy, with your book. I read about everything I can get my hands on that has anything to do with recovery. And as I told my group members in the Tuesday night group last night, there's interesting information and important information. And what I have read in your book, Finding Peace, a workbook on healing from loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, and abuse. This is not just interesting, it's important. And I'm hoping that what you share today in the webinar for some will be a game changer. This book resonated with me like no book I've read probably in the last decade. Wow. So nicely done. But before we get into that, Troy, how in the world did you find yourself getting into this space, working with addiction, recovery? Can you share a little bit of your own story with us?
Sure. So when I was little, how I introduced myself was that I'm adopted. Hi, I'm Troy, and I'm adopted. I thought it was pretty cool to be adopted. I had a closed adoption, and so I didn't know anything about my birth mother or my birth father, and I was raised in a family that was very loving, but they also had some issues like I think most families do. And some of those issues included domestic violence issues. As I started to get a little older, especially in middle school, I was bullied a lot. People called me all kinds of names. I got beaten up in the locker rooms. And around that same time, I discovered masturbation, which was a self-soothing behavior that really worked for me. But I also felt like it was wrong. And so I had this tug of war inside about I'm not doing something I should be doing, and yet it feels so good, and battled with that for a very, very long time. And then when I got into my 20s, that's when the internet was created, and I quickly discovered that you could access porn. And so at that point, I became a porn addict, although I didn't know that that's what it was. It wasn't until I went to school to get my master's degree, and I was placed in an internship where I worked with drug and alcohol, people who struggle with drug and alcohol, that I could relate to them. I had never done drugs. I'd never drank alcohol, but I could relate to their stories, that compulsion, that cycle that they got trapped in. And that's when I really began to understand that I have an addiction, and I was introduced to the whole world of sexual addiction and treatment for that. I finished my degree. I became a therapist. I was really trying to figure out how I could wrap my head around my own recovery. I had to do a lot of my own recovery. That spent about 8 years in therapy, working on all of this stuff. And as I was going along, I was learning all kinds of different pieces from this therapist or this book or those kind of things. And I was trying to find a way to conceptualize it so I could understand it. And then I took a class by Sue Johnson, who is a therapist who focuses on emotionally focused couples therapy, very much attachment driven. She introduced me to John Bowlby. I started to learn about all this attachment stuff, and I started to realize I have some hurts around these attachments. Being adopted, growing up in a family where there was domestic violence, being bullied, my own sense of shame. And I tried to figure out how can I explain this to people? And so I came up with the word attachment wounds as a way of helping me understand what they were. And I began to label them so that I could actually identified I had some experience working in the hospital for a while, and the importance of nurses being able to do wound assessment and figuring out what kind of wound this is and how are we going to treat that really helped me figure out, okay, well, this is a loss wound or this is an abandonment wound, and began to put some words to what was going on for me so that I could start healing in a better way. So that's how that all came to be.
I just resonate with that so much. Even when you said discovering that you were an addict, to me, I remember the day I was, and you and I were talking about this yesterday when we had a chance to chat. I saw a video, and this is now going on almost 30 years, but I didn't know how to conceptualize what was wrong with me. But I did bring my object lesson that I'm famous for. If you want to buy this little piece of dog do, it's on Amazon for $1.95, I think. But I use this because it reminds me of the only answer I ever seemed to have as to why I was so deeply entrenched in this behavior. I was both a drug addict. I was a prescription drug user from an injury I'd had playing college football. And then I threw in porn addiction. And when I couldn't stop, I would say, why? And I would say, what's wrong with me? And especially back then, there weren't a lot of books. There was nothing on, the brain science of change. Even though Bowlby had been around for a while, the idea of attachment and attachment disorders was still relatively new. And I certainly knew nothing about it. This was my answer. I'm a piece of garbage. And as I read your book, I saw this piece of dog do permeate this topic of attachment wounds. And interestingly enough, Troy, last night, again, I see we've got a couple of guys from the Tuesday night group, but I asked my group members last night in preparation for today, how many of you, and I went through the whole thing. I said, how many of you struggle or have struggled at one time with loss or neglect or abandonment or betrayal or abuse or rejection? And I'll tell you, the hands went up. Almost all the hands went up for almost all the wounds that you describe in your book. This is a needed thing to identify as we on our journey to freedom from porn. And so I want to just move forward and say that what in the world are attachment wounds? I've enjoyed reading the book. You and I have had a good discussion, and hopefully we will also in the future. But what in the world are attachment wounds, Troy?
So we are wired for connection, neurologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually. We are wired for connection. We don't live on a planet with 8 billion other people just so we can live by ourselves. We're born into families. We are supposed to have relationships. And when the relationships are really healthy, that's great. But we live in an imperfect world and things happen in those relationships. And when those connections break, that causes trauma. And I call those attachment wounds. So we have loss wounds, which are, I had a connection with somebody and then they passed away, or my best friend moved across the country and I don't get to see him anymore, or I had to move across the country, or I lost my leg, or whatever those happen to be. That wound of loss is really a wound that isn't that anybody did it to you on purpose, but it's definitely, it was there today and it's not there tomorrow. And so it's a loss wound and it can cause a lot of pain.
Well, and you also, by the way, I jumped when you said domestic violence. Some of these things sort of just happen. Some of them are really imposed on us.
Oh, yeah.
By those in power over us, those that have, stewardship over us, and they abuse that privilege of parenthood, be it
absolutely
birth parents or foster parents. These wounds are real.
Yeah. And so that's the abuse wound. That's the last of the 6 that I mentioned. We have rejection, abandonment, neglect, betrayal. Those are the other wounds that we can experience. Rejection. Somebody conveys a message to you that you're not good enough. My rejection wound was born in middle school with all my peers telling me there was something wrong with me, calling me names, beating me up. I'm feeling really small. Neglect is a wound when you're trying to get people's attention. Your mom and dad, they're too busy. They're on their phone. They're checked out. So they're in the same room, but you're not getting your needs met with that person. Betrayal, somebody lies to you. So those are the attachment wounds, and we've all probably experienced some of them, and some of them are a lot more painful than others, and some of them last a lot longer and don't heal as quickly either.
One of the things that I found interesting personally as I went through your book was I was rehearsing my own story. I've shared that many times with both my group members and others on Fortify. But when I was about 8 years old, I found myself in mom and dad's bathroom, and I was rummaging through. They had like the little magazine rack, newspapers and stuff like that. And I found the Marilyn Monroe issue of Playboy. That was the first recollection of ever seeing anything pornographic, ever seeing a naked woman. And I didn't have any words for it, but I sure know how I felt. And it was very exciting. But as I was writing some notes in your workbook, I was actually following along and making some entries. I thought, why was I in mom and dad's bathroom? What was I doing in there? And I remember that specific time that my brother and I were being babysat for almost 2 weeks by a live-in maid. And I was so lonesome and felt so neglected, if you will. And you talk about needs not being met. Mom and dad, of course, would come home, hug. Oh, we love our boys. But something was missing. And again, not intentional. Probably they didn't even know. But I felt that I realized that experience came at a moment when I was experiencing what went on for years of abandonment and neglect and really, in a sense, rejection. I hear you say the words, you love me, but you're always gone. You're always doing stuff for you guys. And this just came out in your book. Those were issues that have been huge drivers in what I call the need to medicate, or the perceived need to medicate. We share that, Troy.
Yeah.
We've got these attachment wounds. You've named them. How do they, other than what we've just said, can you expand a little bit on how they relate, how they can drive our compulsive behaviors that surround our use of porn and to include masturbation?
Yeah. So each one of those wounds has an associated need with it. So loss, the need that goes with loss is reassurance. Need some reassurance that everything's going to be okay. Because the need that goes with abandonment is presence. I need someone to be there for me. The need that goes with rejection is acceptance. I need someone to just accept me the way that I am. The need that goes with betrayal is trust. The need that goes with abuse is compassion. And so what I experienced, and what many of the men that I work with had experienced, is that porn was always there. So I have an abandonment wound. I have a rejection wound. Porn was always there. I could always count on porn to be there for me. It wasn't going to leave me. I could go back and find it whenever I needed to. I could get the acceptance that it portrayed, that I felt during the moments that I was viewing it. So I was, in a way, getting my needs met. I was pouring sugar. I use the expression of pouring sugar in my gas tank. My gas tank actually needed fuel, but I was pouring sugar in there. Felt it was really nice. So I thought I was getting my needs met, but in fact, it made things worse. In the end, I would feel more rejected, more abandoned. So, well, porn's really there. So I'll just go back and go get it again.
Are you familiar with Dr. Vernon Johnson? He's from quite a long time ago. Some people still use his material, but he came up with, the shortcut name is the emotional hookup that we have, both the drugs, alcohol, porn, and other compulsive behaviors. But when I was exposed to this idea, you hit on it when you said, porn is always there. Here are my wounds. Which are my, and they, when I'm wounded, I have these feelings and emotions. And generally that mood, if you were to put it on a scale of say 1 to 10, 10 being euphoric or feeling great, 1 being perhaps suicidal, different for all of us. But I always noticed my first 30 years of life, I lived in a world where my emotions were 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 and maybe 4, once in a while a 7 or an 8, but quickly back down to this 2 and 3 level. Dr. Johnson suggested that if we would look at the first time we used, which for me was seeing that Marilyn Monroe issue, whatever mood I was at, which in fact was lonely, rejected, abandoned, I looked at porn and whoop, that meter just shot up to what was a perceived feeling of 6, 7, 8, pretty darn good. Though I couldn't give it a name, it sure felt good. It satisfied the curiosity. And anyway, he talks about making this contract, that literally we make a contract in our minds and sort of in our hearts that it works every time. And again, gives me the perception of medication and soothing. And in fact, you said, and when I follow that course, it actually backfires. And eventually, as we know, those late stages of compulsive behavior and addiction, there starts to be harm where we used to think, I'm just looking at this magazine, it can't possibly be hurting anybody. And some of us that have lived long enough and have experienced some of those consequences, we know that whatever short-term satisfaction there is in that medicated state, how quickly it disappears. If I have attachment wounds, which I do, how can I find out about what attachment wounds I have? This might be a good time to talk about the book.
Yeah. So the first chapter in the book. So let me tell a little bit about the book. So when I started writing the book, at first I wrote it like a traditional self-help book, and I was getting bored. I was like, this is not working. So I kind of sat with it for a little while and thought, how could I do this a little better? I like to tell stories. So I created a group, and I created 8 different characters, 9 characters if you count Todd, 8 characters who are group members who've all decided to come to this group. They all want to have healing, and each one of them has a different primary attachment wound that has led them to the group. And so I created it that way so that you could feel like you're a part of the group, like you could maybe connect with those characters and maybe you could relate. And it was an easier way of being able to describe some of these wounds. And so how it works is they come to group. Todd is the therapist, which an inside joke, my mother-in-law called me Todd for the first year of my life. So that's where that comes from. So Todd is the therapist who's guiding these characters through this lesson. And so he explains the 6 attachment wounds, and then he gives them homework, which is the workbook assessment, doing the assessment for the attachment wounds. And then at the end of that chapter, then that's also there for the reader to do along with the characters in the book. So to answer your question, that was a long answer for your question. But if you want to know what your attachment wounds are, read the first chapter of the book. And I have it, the first chapter is available for free if you go to my website, and you can download that. So I can put the link there for you if that would be helpful.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Because again, we'll have from whatever our group is that's live today, there'll be a huge group that follows, because again, it's not always convenient. If you're in, if you're in New Zealand right now, you might be sound asleep, or you're maybe getting ready for bed. It's not convenient, but we have a lot of people that listen on the replay, and that link will stay active, and they can click on that. You also mentioned something else that I think's helpful. I hope it will be helpful to address, Troy. When you said you wanted to sort of understand your addiction, and we didn't really have words, compartments. You had all this information from a variety of experiences and therapists, maybe books that you had read. When I saw that there is a model, and forgive me if I don't know, I just call it the Troy Love model, but the model that progresses throughout the book is one of the most brilliant concepts I have ever seen in recovery. I love acronyms. I love visuals, and a lot of us that have struggled with porn, we are visual learners, visual people. And we have these little phrases like peeling the onion. And so I have a variety of things and analogies and metaphors that float around in my head. Your model seems to collect my 25 years of experience in recovery and really puts it in, I almost want to say, there it is. That's it. I think you've done a brilliant job. Can you talk? Are you able to, and we didn't discuss this, could you talk about your model? I don't know if I can, I've got a screenshot of it.
Okay.
I wonder if, and I can't share my screen right now, but I'm wondering if I can post an object. If, Ashley, if you're listening, I want to know how I can have viewers see this model, at least after the webinar, if not during it. But tell us about this great model, because I see that start and it expands, and it makes so much sense. And the sense that's made of it is such a relief. It doesn't solve my addiction, but it's like it certainly gets me away from these kind of conclusions. I look at that model and say, that was me. And I'm still working on that model, but that was me.
So it starts with a yin and yang in the middle. So there's if you think about it, on one side, there's peace, and on the other side, there's pain. And when I talk about this, I usually ask people, how many of you have so much peace in your life right now that there's not room for any more? I've only had like 2 people raise their hand. So either they were really high or they were really zen. I don't know. But the rest of the people that I talk to, they're like, no, I need more peace in my life. So the dilemma is that with pain and peace, we live in a world where there's a lot of pain. And so the yin and yang is, how do I find peace even though there's pain? And that's what the book is really all about, is how do we do that? So the having pain in our life, though, helps us actually be more grateful for the peace that we experience when we have it. And if I haven't had any pain in my life, I'm not really going to realize the peace so much. So that's where it starts. How do we find peace amid the pain? And the pain really stems from those attachment wounds. So I use the analogy, they're like sunburns. You go to the beach, you get baked, you forgot to put sunblock on. So the next day you have to go to work and you're just really praying that nobody touches you. But inevitably somebody always comes up when you have a sunburn and says, hey, how's it going? And innocently they touch you, but immediately there's this painful reaction. And that's what these wounds are like. So I can function, I can go to work, I can do all the things that I need to do, but somebody might come up and they might touch that wound, and then there's immediately a reaction. They may bump up against my rejection wound or my abandonment wound or whatever the wound is, and there's an immediate reaction. What's happened is that as those wounds were created, I tried to make sense of why those wounds were happening. And usually these wounds happen when we're kids, and we don't have the cognitive ability to be able to make sense of those wounds. And so what we end up doing is we end up writing messages, tattooing messages on our heart that explain why these things happen to us. And so there's 3 genres of core beliefs that we end up tattooing on our heart. The first is I am, and that genre is I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. There must be something deficient from me. The second genre is trust. I can't trust other people. The world is unsafe. The world is undependable. And then the third genre is, brain just left. The third genre is capability, or the powerless. I'm powerless. So that genre is there's nothing I can do about it. So we have the yin and yang in the middle, and then the next layer of the model is that those core messages that we have going on that we've written. And so every time now that wound gets stirred up, that lights up the message that we've been carrying around with us. And it's almost like we continue to look for evidence to support that negative core message that's been written on our heart. When that wound is touched and that core message lights up, we're going to feel some feelings. So the next layer is the core emotions. We're probably going to feel angry. We're going to probably feel sad. We might feel afraid. We might feel all three of those. And so we're feeling these emotions, but we live in a world where we're not allowed to express our emotions. We're not allowed to share with other people how we feel. And so immediately those emotions show up. We don't know what to do with them. And so immediately we begin to feel shame. Like there must be really something wrong with me. And that's the next layer of the model. And we'll probably go into it later, but I talk about the six personifications of shame in that area. But shame is a master emotion. It's like a fog that settles on everything and covers everything up. Everything's really painful. So I got to figure out a way to deal with this. So I'm going to go to the next level, which is numbing. And I'm going to numb. There's thousands of ways that I'm going to numb this. I'm going to shut this pain down as fast as I can because it's too unbearable. And then when I'm numbing, Brene Brown said in one of her TED Talks that when you can't selectively numb emotion, you can't selectively numb anger and sadness. When you numb everything, including peace. And so instead of feeling better, we go to the last ring of the model, which is now I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm resentful, I'm bitter. And I call those mutated emotions. Those core emotions have mutated into darker, unhappy emotions. And now I'm really, really far away from peace. And so in order to get to peace, we're going to unpeel the onion, take all those layers off, and start to come back and really deal with the core issue, which is I got some wounds that I need to attend to. I need to start treating them in a different way.
I've got so much going on. When you were describing that, I think of the character Pigpen in Peanuts. I realize that what has started as attachment wounds, pain, that has then grown through what you're talking about, the core beliefs, and then there are these emotions and these things tattooed in my heart. I'm really like Pigpen walking around with all this garbage around me, at least cognitively and emotionally. And in truth, although people will tell me, oh, you have the choice to not do this or to not do this or to do this. But it feels like in that mood, Troy, my options to say no are so diminished, almost not available. They are, but how difficult to access them when I have been, again, I've been telling myself these, what really amount to lies. If I say I can't do this, it's a lie. I can. I may not know how. I may need to get help, but I can. If I say I'm a piece of garbage and carry that tattooed on my heart and my mind, I feel almost helpless and hopeless, but it is a lie. And I wonder, when people lie to us, we are outraged, yet we lie to ourselves and we let it be. And maybe we don't attack it as aggressively as we might if it was somebody else saying. Yet we're saying the lie to ourselves. These emotions and beliefs, they're real in that we feel them, but it seems like they've been created out of an illusion, a mirage. And in our youth, when we can't give it a name or a definition, if somebody would have said I was a porn addict at 7, I wouldn't even have known what that meant. I just know I was excited when I saw that issue of Playboy. And every other time I looked at pornography thereafter was titillating, arousing, exciting. But I had no words other than to conclude when I tried to stop later on that something was wrong with me, a freak of nature. Those are lies. I'm a human being with issues. Simple as that.
That's right.
And somebody asked the question, and we may have answered this. Lewis asked the name of the book, and let's, I'll say it again. And just if you're listening, we will post the links at the conclusion of the seminar. The links stay active. Those of you that go back and watch or listen on the replay, the links will be there. The title of the book, the link to get there. So we're not going to leave you hanging on that. I think I had another question. Yeah, and you've touched on the core beliefs and how do we create them? So I have these wounds. Can you give a couple of examples? You have some great ones in the book on that, on the ongoing group. They make these marvelous self-discoveries from participating in that group. How do I create them? Where do they really come from?
Okay, so if I use the example of me being bullied in middle school,
Yeah.
The names that people would call me, I didn't have the cognitive ability to understand that those kids were also suffering, that those kids also had wounds going on in their lives. I didn't have the cognitive ability to be able to figure that out. And so in my egocentric developmental stage, the only option that I had as a 12, 13-year-old boy was to say, well, there must be something wrong with me. I've got all these kids who are telling me that I'm no good, that I'm gay, that I'm a faggot, that I'm, whatever, that it must be. And so immediately I'm writing it. I use the analogy. I use the example like in Harry Potter when he gets in trouble with Professor. Oh my gosh, just lost her name. Umbridge, because he's trying to tell the truth that Dumbledore has returned, and she gives him detention, and he has to write lines, and he has to write, "I will not tell lies." And the pen is magic, so it actually gets written into his arm. And he says, well, how many times do I have to write this? And she says, until it sticks, until the words don't fade away. And that's what happens with these attachment wounds. I just keep rewriting it. I'm a piece of crap. There's something wrong with me until it's there. And I use the analogy that it's like written in fluorescent ink. So you go to, if you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese, they stamp you with the fluorescent stamp so you can figure out, they shine the black light on there. The light isn't always on. I'm not carrying this around, but the moment that wound gets stirred up, it's like somebody turns the black light on, and there it is. Oh, I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. And so the goal is to, let's do some tattoo removal. We want to do some laser removal and remove that message and cover the truth that actually I'm enough, that I am just fine the way I am. So that's the healing part of that.
Analogies, metaphors, the Troy Love model, as I call it. Do you have another formal name for that? The model, Troy?
I call it the Finding Peace model.
Okay, the Finding Peace model. Peace, excitement, happiness, joy, contentment. A lot of us give greater strength to certain words than others. I have a belief, and I've shared that with many Fortify users on the forums and groups, doing one-on-one work. The great antidote to all of our troubles is happiness. If I was happy, it would imply that I'm not in pain. And I've had people say, well, that's easy for you to say, Vinny. You're married. Most don't know it's a second marriage, marvelous second chance. But they seem to think that the acquisition of happiness is for others, not themselves. I like the idea that gratitude creates happiness, but happiness is not bungee jumping. It may not be skydiving. And somebody said the other day to me that actually it was a couple of months ago, that the feeling they're looking for is a feeling that lasts when the party is over on Friday night and the lights go out and they go home. The excitement, if you want to use the word excitement, the fun, the memory, it's still there for quite some time. And when I read your book, sorry to take so long getting to that point, I love the word peace. I have an analogy called the house of misery. You and I talked about this yesterday. And it is this place we live in. We've built it through whatever experiences we've had. We've built this house of misery. Your book has given names to the rooms in this house, Troy, and I thank you for that. I can see now that the living room is rejection. The bedroom is abuse. For me, I have what it looks like. And I've always told people, you want to get to the house of joy. After reading your book, I am convinced I'm renaming the other house. It is the house of peace. Peace seems to be this marvelous, pervasive, penetrating feeling that, again, I may not get the same emotional feeling from it as jumping out of an airplane and pulling the ripcord, hoping it opens. To me, that's excitement. And it's a different feeling. It's fun to feel excitement from time to time, but what I want, what I seek is peace. Show me a man whose life is filled with peace, contentment, joy. I'll show you somebody that is likely not struggling with any kind of addiction. And I felt that message I feel that message on the Fortify platform, but I felt a very interesting piece of peace in your book, that was the elusive thing that I am really looking for. And happiness is peace, contentment is peace. But if I'm not at peace, Troy, I'm going to my number one thing on my list to medicate or to find that pseudo sense of peace. Any of that makes sense? I mean, these are all awakenings over the last month, having read your book, and they're powerful.
Thank you.
You brought up the S word, and I know people are saying, "Oh, I've heard of shame. Oh, I read all about shame. Guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad." You have an amazing take on the shadow shame. Can you talk a little bit? Maybe even we'll move towards concluding the webinar with, want to make sure we hit that topic of shame and how you discuss it and use it in the book.
So Brene Brown defines shame as the deep and abiding belief or experience that I'm flawed and defective and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So shame, we have these negative messages that are written on our hearts. Then we have emotions that we are trying to express. We need something because of the pain, and then shame shows up and runs interference and says, you're not worthy of getting any attention. You're not worthy of getting any comfort. You're not worthy of getting any presence, trust, any of that stuff. So shame, like I said, it's this fog that just shows up and covers everything. And so I was introduced to this, he doesn't call it this, but I attended a class by Gary Van Warmerdam, and he introduced me to Carl Jung's version of shadows, and I took it, and I'm like, that really resonates with me. So I was able to personify shame in 6 different ways. And so the first, and the one that I talk about a lot, the one that most people can resonate with a lot, is the judge. And the judge is that voice inside that says there's something wrong with you. You're not enough. You're not measuring up. Here's where you're supposed to be, and here's where you're at. You're not perfect. And that judge voice just like is nonstop, always talking, always talking, always talking. And always is conveying, it's amplifying what I already believe about myself and just saying, well, yes, you aren't good enough, and here's what you could do to be better, so you should try harder. And so the judge really loves the word should. And when I introduce that voice in and of itself, just the judge, people are like, oh my gosh, I have one of those. He doesn't ever stop talking. And I say, okay, now here's the important piece to understand. I want you to understand that the judge is not you. The judge is a defense mechanism. The judge is like, even imagine that the judge is sitting across the room and telling you this kind of stuff. There's some power in being able to identify, well, I'm not the judge. Because once I'm able to identify, wow, I'm hearing you, I'm listening to what you're saying. Maybe I don't believe what you're saying. I can have some dialogue about that. Before then, I thought it was just me. I thought I was me telling me that I'm not enough. But no, that's been the judge. The other shadow of shame that really shows up in addiction is the rebel.
Yeah.
And the rebel says, you know what, you should just do it. Who cares if it's going to hurt anybody? Who cares about the consequences? You should just do it. It's a way of numbing. Let's just go numb because it's so painful. So those are two. There's four more. I don't know if we have time for all four, but those are two of the shadows of shame. They show up. I just wrote a blog post about that. They show up like the engine light. When you're driving down the street and the engine light shows up, that's an indication that something has happened. And I don't sit there and say to myself, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person because the engine light just turned on. Like, what's wrong with me that the engine light turns on? I don't do that. I look at it and say, oh, I got to take this to the mechanic. I need to take it to the store, figure out what's going on. When a shadow shows up, that's like the engine light has just shown up. Oh, that's an indication that one of my attachment wounds just got stirred up. Something's going on. Let me go take care of that wound, and the judge will go away.
At Fortify, we talk about our journey, our quest for freedom from porn. And again, easy to say, hard to do. There's a lot of work involved. I am biased. I love the Fortify platform. I love the information. I think a man can be so much further along in his quest for freedom by following concepts. But there is another concept that comes up. I have people say, oh, I've done this program, or I've been with this therapist, and it seems like all they're doing is hacking at the branches. And, and what we know in that analogy is I can cut the leaves and the branches off, but if I don't get to the roots, those branches and leaves will come back. One of the reasons I commented at the beginning that I felt like your book is not just interesting, but important. And again, I have to look at it, at least from my vantage point and my experience with my own addiction, my own demons and compulsions. It spoke to me that we were talking about roots, maybe even tip of the roots. Has that been your experience as you've worked with clients, Troy?
Yeah. When I introduce, we carry so much shame about our behaviors. I carry so much shame about the behaviors that I've engaged in. But when I start to understand, yeah, I have an abandonment wound from the time I was born. And although I'm really grateful that my birth mother made the decisions she made to do what she did, because I'm not sure that the outcome would have been good the other way, there was still an abandonment. And when I am able to connect that to, and that's why I kept turning to porn, it's a lot less shaming. And I'm able to then say, okay, I have an abandonment wound. What do I need? Well, I need some presence. Let me figure out a healthy way to go get that need met. Let me reach out to my wife. Let me reach out to a friend when I'm feeling lonely and actually get that need met in a really healthy way. It actually fosters recovery when I address the wound itself. I go to the root. It's an amazing way that I've been able to experience for me and teach other people that when you have a neglect wound, you go find someone to pay attention to you in a healthy way. When you have a rejection wound, I literally have a friend, and we kind of joke, but when we're feeling like a bad dad, I'll call him up and say, hey, Matt, I'm feeling like a really bad dad. And he'll say, Troy, you are a really good dad. And he'll call me up and say, I'm feeling like a really bad dad. Matt, you're a really good dad. Because we need that acceptance. It sounds really cheesy, but we found that that's a really healthier way of getting that need met than me going and logging on and looking at something and then feeling horrible about myself later.
You are president and clinical director of Yuma Counseling Services. You're in Yuma, Arizona. We mentioned that. Married, children, author. I've read your reviews on your book, and none of them are surprising because they're all 5-star. And
Thank you.
Again, it's one of the best works. something you and I did not address yesterday, and I guess it's popping into my head, and it popped into my head when you talked about the check engine light, awareness, mindfulness, even things like denial. I can look at the check engine light, Troy, and say, yeah, I'll get around to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes in my life, I have waited until it went from a $20 fix to a $2,000 engine replacement. Sense of urgency. I have attachment wounds. I'm working a marvelous program of recovery here at Fortify. It's to me, possibly the greatest online resource that there's ever been. There are many, but Fortify is an amazing resource. But I still notice that from time to time, the check engine light comes on and I either ignore it or I say I'll get around to it. Have you had some experiences, and maybe there's some things in your book that I've even forgotten? Sense of urgency. How do I bring a greater sense of urgency to my struggle? I guess I'm leaning towards one of the last questions. My behavior does impact relationships. It impacts society. Can you tie those two together? How can I be more aware of the check engine light? How can I do something about it? And what is the relationship between my behavior and others and society? That's a lot.
Yeah. What comes up for me immediately is I have an accountability partner, and I check in with him every day. And we talk about, in fact, we were just talking about it this morning. We're texting each other because we're trying to lose weight, and how much the judge is running interference, and the impotent one is saying, I can't, I'm not going to be able to do it. And so I'm checking in with him and saying, this is what's coming up for me, because I know that if I don't check in with him, it almost gives the shadows permission to run rampant and hijack my life. And I know what the consequences of that are. I know the devastation of seeing my wife crying and the sadness in her face. And I don't want to ever want to experience that again. And so I'm mindfully checking in with myself and with my accountability people every day. This is what's going on with me. These are the wounds that got stirred up for me. Here's what I need. And when I do that, then I'm in a good place. When I stop, those shadows, they sneak in right there and they hijack everything, and there's devastation that follows.
At Fortify, we strive we refer to ourselves as a resource. The Fortify platform is not formal therapy on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are so many therapeutic benefits to it. But one of the things we strive for is to be open and provide additional information. And the webinars become one of those vehicles. And I want to tell you, Troy, your information is profound. It's if it isn't new, call it the new packaging. Again, we are visual. It's so easy to see. There's me. That's me. That's me. It is a brilliant work, and I commend it to the Fortify members if they get a chance. What are things that you do? Again, I obviously you're in your office there. You're a therapist, but you mentioned things even like retreats, some self-study that's tied into to the workbook. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have an intensive retreat. This is the second one that we've done, and it will be the last weekend in April. And it walks the participants through this what we do in the workbook in a pretty intense way. The participants who went last time said it was intense, but it was also life-changing for them. I don't know about you, but sometimes I kind of procrastinate. And so I know that this is important and I'll get to it, but then I don't. So signing up for a retreat, it's like, we're going to do this. We're going to do some surgery. So that is coming up in the end of April. It's going to be in Prescott, Arizona, which is about an hour and a half north of Phoenix, in the beautiful
Yeah, it's beautiful
place up there. So we're going to be doing that. For those who sign up for that, they also are going to be eligible to take the Finding Peace online course, or people can just sign up for the online course by themselves. And it's another way of walking through the material. It's very much like this format. I'm going into a little bit more depth in each of the topics that are going on. So I can put links to both of those on the comment section if that would be all right.
That'd be great. My only frustration is I wish we had 4 or 5 hours more. You mentioned the impotent man, which we got to not say anything about. We talked about the rebel and the judge, but these characters are fascinating and they're meaningful. And I think many Fortify users will relate and can find this as a wonderful additional resource to the stuff that they're doing here already on the platform. So please share that link, Troy.
Thank you.
I got to ask you, would you be willing to come back at a future date and we'll do part 2?
Absolutely. I would love to come back. Thank you.
There's a lot more to talk about. And, I'm not the last word in recovery science, but I have tried for the last 20 years to become a student of all things recovery. And there are some great books on my shelf, some great experiences with a variety of therapists and clinicians, as well as just working and gaining education, working one-on-one as a porn coach, if you will. But this has been an extraordinary read. I commend it with all, as we say in page 58 of the big book, with all the earnestness at our command.
Thank you.
This is a good read. It's worth it. So
thank you so much.
Any final parting shots before we say goodbye, Troy?
No, I just hope that all of us are able to get a little bit closer to peace and find more joy in our life every day. That's what I'm hoping.
True or false? Show me a man who has acquired peace. I'll show you a man who is not struggling in any serious way with addiction.
I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
I believe that people who have experienced peace have weathered the painful parts, and they've been able to create a perspective that even though there's pain in the world, all is still well, and I'm okay, and things are going to be all right.
I love that. With that mindset, I'm not medicating. I may experience pain, but when everything's going to be okay, which is one of the reasons I was a codeine addict, that gave me the feeling that everything's going to be okay. It was false. It was a mirage. It was an illusion, and brought great disaster in my own life. And those that have experienced that addiction know how disastrous that is. Search for peace. I love it. Thank you so much, Troy Love.
Thank you, Vinny.
Can't wait to meet with you again. And those that have been in attendance today, thank you for your participation. Saw a lot of great comments. I didn't see a lot of questions. And I think the questions I did read, Troy answered those. But feel free to post webinar, post questions. And I'll see if I can't convince Troy to follow up later with any other questions
the
attendees may have. Thank you, Troy.
You're welcome.
See you in February. I want to make a little announcement. We have a budding clinician, Raisha Ismail, will be our webinar in the month of February. She is a colleague, does a spouse support group for those struggling with betrayal trauma. She will be coming from Christchurch, New Zealand, and the University of Canterbury. She will be a main platform speaker at a major conference being held here in Utah called the Utah Coalition Against Pornography. And she will be our guest, and we look forward to having her. I don't know that the date is absolute, but I think it will be Wednesday, February 20th. Thanks, everybody, and thanks again, Troy. We'll see you next month. Take care.